The first thing that broke was not the city walls, but the sound. For 3 weeks, the air around Karakon, the golden dome capital of the Khwarezmian Empire, had been a physical thing, a thunderous, unending roar of trebuchets hurling diseased carcasses and Greek fire, of 10,000 arrows hissing like a steel rain, of the guttural war chants of the Mongol Tumun. But on the day the southern gate splintered, the sound changed. The defensive cacophony of the city, the shouts of captains, the prayers of imams, the screams of engineers, collapsed into a single, unified, terrified wail. It was the sound of a world ending. From her lattice balcony in the highest tower of the royal palace, Princess Liana watched it die. At 16, she had known only silk, poetry, and the scent of jasmine. Now, the wind carried ash in the coppery tang of blood. The golden city was a pyre. Her father, the Shah, had fled west weeks ago, a move of cowardice his generals called strategy. He left her, his only daughter, the jewel of Khwarezm, as a symbol of resilience, a symbol now being trampled under the hooves of hell's own cavalry. "My lady, we must go." Fatima, her old nurse, pulled at her sleeve, her face a mass of tear-streaked terror. There in the lower courtyards, Liana did not move. Her eyes were fixed on the scene below. The Mongol riders flowed through the streets not like men, but like a force of nature, a river of leather and fur, of curved swords that rose and fell with a terrible, rhythmic efficiency. They did not scream in rage like the Persian defenders. They worked in a chilling, silent purpose, broken only by the sharp commands of their officers. They were reapers, and humanity was their harvest. The palace doors, reinforced with iron and blessed by the Grand Mufti himself, lasted less time than the city gates. The sound of their shattering was a final, definitive crack in Liana's world. She heard the brief, brutal clash of steel in the marble halls, the dying cries of the royal guard, then a heavy, booted tread on the spiral staircase leading to her chambers. Fatima threw herself in front of Liana, a futile, feathery shield. The door exploded inward. The man who filled the doorway was not tall, but he was wide, built like a bull, with a face that seemed carved from weathered oak. His eyes, small and dark, swept the room, missing nothing, and came to rest on Liana. He was not the one who frightened her most, however. It was the man who followed him. The second Mongol was different. He was younger, leaner, with a face that held a chilling intelligence. He wore a deal of fine gray wool fur, and his helmet, tucked under his arm, was topped with a horsehair plume dyed blood red. He carried no visible weapon, but an aura of absolute authority radiated from him. He was Subutai, the young general of the Silent Sword. His name was whispered in the markets with more fear than that of Genghis Khan himself. Subutai's gaze passed over the weeping Fatima as if she were a piece of furniture and settled on Liana. He did not leer. He did not smile. He assessed her the way a master horseman assesses a new steed, calculating its bloodline, its spirit, its potential for breaking. "The jewel," he said, his voice quiet, yet it cut through the distant screams. "Intact. Good." The bull-like warrior, Kassar, grunted. "A pretty prize. For the Khan." Subutai's lips twitched in what was not a smile. "The Khan has many jewels. This one has fire in her eyes. That is a rarer thing." He took a step forward. Liana stood her ground, her chin held high, though her legs trembled beneath her silks. "You are a barbarian," she said, her voice a fragile thread of defiance. "You understand nothing of gold or God or glory." Subutai stopped, a flicker of genuine amusement in his eyes. He pointed a finger, not at her, but at the burning city through the balcony. "That is our glory. That is our God. The eternal blue sky rewards strength, not words. Your gold is soft. Your God is silent." His eyes hardened. "We will see how long your defiance lasts." He nodded to Kassar. The big warrior grabbed Fatima, who clung to Liana's legs. With a single, brutal motion, he pulled her away and shoved her towards the door. Liana cried out, reaching for her nurse. "Do not kill her," Subutai commanded, his tone conversational. "She is of no consequence." Kassar dragged the shrieking woman out. Liana was left alone with the general. The silence in the room was heavier than the previous noise. "What will you do with me?" Liana asked, her defiance crumbling into fear. You are a symbol, Sabutai said, walking slowly around her. Your father's city is broken. His people are being purged. But to truly conquer a land, you must conquer its spirit. You are that spirit, princess. Your submission will be the final victory. He stopped in front of her. You will not be thrown to the men. You will not be a common slave. You will come with me. You will eat what I eat, travel where I travel. You will see the empire we are building from the ashes of your world. And you will learn. Learn what? She whispered. What it means to be strong. The journey to the Mongol camp was a descent into a new kind of hell. Liana, mounted on a small, shaggy pony, her hands bound, was led through streets choked with the dead. Mongol soldiers moved with dispassionate efficiency, sorting the population. Artisans and craftsmen were shackled together for future use. Young men who showed spirit were given a choice: join the auxiliary forces or join the dead. The rest, the old, the weak, the defiant, were methodically executed. The air was thick with flies and the moans of the dying. She saw things that would be etched behind her eyelids forever. A child clinging to its dead mother, silenced by a casual arrow. A mullah, his holy book torn and trampled, beheaded on the steps of his own mosque. The Mongols showed no anger, no hatred, no pleasure. It was simply work. The camp, when they reached it, was a city of leather tents organized with a geometric precision that mirrored their battle formations. It was clean, orderly, and teeming with a fierce, disciplined energy. It was, in its own way, more terrifying than the chaotic ruin of Karakhan. Here, destruction was not an accident. It was an industry. Liana was placed in Subutai's own large gur, separate from his personal quarters by a heavy felt curtain. A silent, ancient Mongol woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, was assigned to tend to her. She was given mare's milk and strips of dried meat. She ate because her body demanded it, though the food tasted of ashes. That night, she heard the celebrations, the deep-throated singing, the rhythmic drumming, the sounds of the people rejoicing in their absolute victory. She expected Subutai to come for her, to claim the spoils of war in the most primal way. She had prepared herself for that violation, the final shattering of her old self. But he did not come. The next morning, he was there, sitting cross-legged on a rug, studying a map drawn on silk. He looked up as she emerged from behind the curtain. "You expected me to take you last night," he said without preamble. Liana flushed, saying nothing. "Your Persian nobles, your Turkish sultans, they believe power is demonstrated by taking women. It is a small man's power." He tapped the map. A man who cannot control his own desires cannot control an army, cannot control an empire. He gestured for her to sit. Warily, she did, on the far side of the rug. "You're asking yourself, what does he want from me?" Subutai continued. "I want you to understand. Conquest is not just about burning cities. It is about breaking the will to ever build them again in defiance of us. A broken slave is useless. A thinking prisoner who has come to see the world through her captor's eyes, that is a tool, that is a victory." For weeks, this became their routine. By day, she traveled with his command group. He would sometimes point out features of the land, explaining why a certain hill was chosen for an ambush, why a river crossing was secured in a specific way. He spoke to her of logistics, of scouting, of the importance of speed and misinformation. It was a chilling, clinical education in the science of annihilation. His own warriors watched this with growing unease. They saw their fierce, revered general spending hours in the company of a captured noblewoman, not as a concubine, but almost as an apprentice. They saw him ensure she was fed, that she was warm. They saw him forbid any man from touching her, on pain of a slow, painful death. They did not understand. Whispers began to circulate around the campfires. Was the general bewitched? Had the Persian which stolen his spirit? Khazar's most loyal lieutenant finally confronted him one evening. Liana, seated just inside the Gair's entrance, listened, her heart pounding. "The men talk, Sabai," Khazar's gruff voice carried easily. "They say you treat the Persian flower with too much care. They have taken their pleasures with 1,000 women from 100 cities. They do not understand why this one is different. It weakens you in their eyes." Subutai's reply was calm. Do they think I am soft, Cassar? They think you are not yourself. And what do the men do with the women they capture? Subutai asked. What they will. They are the spoils of war. They use them. And when they are tired of them, they discard them or sell them. This is the way. And what remains of those women? Subutai pressed. Cassar was silent for a moment. Broken spirits. Empty shells. Exactly, Subutai said, his voice dropping, becoming colder than the steppe wind. And what does that achieve? A moment of pleasure? A brief feeling of power? It is a waste of a resource. Look at her, Cassar. She is the daughter of a Shah. She can read. She can write. She understands the politics of empires we have yet to conquer. She has been raised to rule. To break her body is easy. Any brute can do that. But to bend that will, to reshape that mind, to make the daughter of our enemy see the wisdom of our path, that is a conquest that echoes through generations. That is how you truly erase a people, not by killing their bodies, but by converting their heirs. He paused, letting his words sink in. The men are shocked because they think only with their loins and their swords. I am thinking with the future of the Mongol Empire, and that is what they cannot comprehend. Liana, listening in the shadows, felt a cold dread, far deeper than any fear of rape or execution, seep into her bones. She finally understood. She was not a prize to be enjoyed. She was a battlefield. Part 2. The Unraveling and the Weave. The Mongol host moved west, a storm of hoof and steel. Liana, now a permanent, ghostly fixture in Subutai's retinue, watched them reduce a fortified town to rubble in a single day. She saw their mastery of siegecraft, their terrifying archery, their ability to move with unity that made the armies of her father look like squabbling children. And through it all, Subutai was her relentless tutor. He never raised his voice to her. He never threatened her with physical harm. His method was more insidious. He dismantled her world, brick by philosophical brick. One evening, as they surveyed the smoldering ruins of a town that had foolishly resisted, he gestured to the scene. They chose honor over survival. Their priests told them their God would deliver them. Now they are dead, and their God did nothing. Our God, the eternal blue sky, rewards only the strong. Which God is more real? Another time, he pointed to a group of captured artisans, now working diligently for the Mongols, forging weapons for their captors. See? They built walls for their old masters. Now they build engines of war for us. A man's loyalty is to his craft and his life, not to a king or a flag. Your father's empire was built on sand, the shifting loyalties of vain nobles. Our empire is built on the bedrock of merit. A man rises by his skill, not his birth. That is why we are stronger. Liana's initial defiance turned into a sullen silence, which then eroded into a horrified fascination. His logic was brutal, but it was consistent. It had a terrible, ruthless beauty, like the geometry of a spider's web. She found herself starting to see the weaknesses in her own culture, the decadence and corruption that had made Khwarezm a ripe fruit for the picking. The shock among the warriors deepened. They saw the princess, once pale and trembling, now riding with a straighter back, her eyes taking the movement of troops, the lay of the land. They saw her and Subutai in deep conversation. The whispers grew from confusion to a low, simmering discontent. They called her Bordiai behind her back, a reference to the wise and powerful first wife of Genghis Khan, but spoken with a tone of dark suspicion. They could not reconcile the treatment of this foreign woman with the savage code of the steppes. The breaking point came during the campaign against the Georgian kingdom. The Georgians, famed for their heavy cavalry, met the Mongols on an open plain, a seemingly ideal battlefield for the chivalric charge. Subutai feigned a retreat, drawing the Georgian knights into a carefully prepared killing ground of hidden pits and taut ropes. As the magnificent cavalry tumbled and fell, the Mongol horse archers circled, turning the flower of Georgian nobility into a pincushion. After the battle, a captured Georgian prince, a man of legendary pride and handsomeness, was brought before Subutai. The prince, though bound, spat at the general's feet, hurling insults in his native tongue. Subutai listened impassively. Then he turned to Liana, who was watching from her pony. "Translate," he commanded. Lyanna froze. To give voice to the prince's defiance was one thing. To be the instrument of its consequence was another. "Translate," Sabitai repeated, his voice devoid of emotion. Haltingly, Lyanna translated the prince's words. He calls you a dog of the devil. He says his God will curse you for 1,000 generations. He says his people will never submit." Sabutai nodded. He looked at the proud, furious prince, then back at Lyanna. "He has spirit, like you once had. But spirit without wisdom is just noise." He turned to Cassar. "Take him to the men. Let them have their sport with him." A ripple of shock went through the assembled Mongol officers. Cassar himself looked stunned. To execute a noble prisoner was one thing. To give him to the common warriors for brutalization was a profound dishonor, reserved for the lowest of enemies. It went against their own complex code of honor. "General," Cassar began, his voice low. "You question me?" Sabutai's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of an avalanche. Cassar bowed his head. "No, General." As Cassar and others dragged the struggling, suddenly terrified prince away, Sabutai turned his gaze back to the horrified Lyanna. The message was clear. See the alternative? See what happens to defiance that is no use? I have spared you this not out of kindness, but because you have a higher purpose. That night, the camp was uneasy. The warriors, though they had taken their brutal pleasure, were unsettled. The act felt wrong. It was a desecration that offended their own sense of order. And they knew it was a lesson, not for the prince, but for the Persian princess. They were being used as a blunt instrument to shape her will, and it left a bitter taste. Lyanna did not sleep. The prince's screams echoed in her mind, mingling with Sabutai's cold, pedagogical tone. She was trapped in a web of terrifying clarity. On one side was the raw, animalistic brutality of the warriors, a fate she had been spared. On the other was a chilling, intellectual embrace of the general, a fate that promised survival, even influence, at the cost of her very soul. She found herself standing at the entrance to his private section of the GR. He was sitting by a small brazier, sharpening his dagger with a slow, rhythmic scrape of stone on steel. "Why?" she asked, her voice raw. "Why show me that? Why not just let me believe you were noble?" He did not look up. "There is no nobility in conquest, girl, only necessity. I showed you the reality of the alternative. The warriors break the body. I seek to break the chains of a weak philosophy that binds you. The first is quick. The second is permanent. You must understand the cost of both to choose the path of strength." "You want me to choose?" She laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "What choice do I have?" "You always have a choice," he said, finally looking up, the firelight dancing in his dark eyes. "You can choose to be the Georgian prince, a beautiful memory, a story of feudal defiance. Or you can choose to be like me, to see the world as it is, not as priests and poets say it should be, to become a weaver of destiny, not just a thread in its tapestry." He held up the dagger, its edge gleaming. "This is a tool. It can kill one man. But the mind," he tapped his temple, "the mind can conquer a continent. Your mind is the greatest prize I took from Karakhan, and I will have it, willingly." In that moment, Lyanna felt the last vestiges of her old self slew away. The princess was gone. What remained was a creature of pure survival, standing at a precipice. She could leap into the abyss of brutal, meaningless death, or she could step on the path of terrible, immense power offered by her captor. The choice, as he said, was hers, and the fact that she was even considering it was the most shocking victory he had won yet. A year passed. The Mongol tide swept through the Caucasus and probed the edges of the Russian principalities. Lyanna was no longer a prisoner. She was a fixture. She had learned the Mongol tongue, not just a common speech, but the nuanced language of command and strategy. She still wore the remnants of her fine silks, but over them, she now wore a practical, fur-lined Mongol coat against the biting cold. The warriors no longer whispered when she passed. They averted their eyes. The confusion had been replaced by a wary, grudging acceptance. The general's shadow had a shadow. She had made her choice, not in a single, dramatic moment, but in 1,000 small surrenders. She began to offer observations to Subutai, not as a captive, but as a junior strategist. She explained the complex rivalries between the Russian princes, knowledge gleaned from diplomats who had visited her father's court. She outlined their tactics, their reliance on fortified cities and heavy cavalry, their inability to unite. Subutai listened. He began to incorporate her insights into his plans. He would present a strategy to his officers, and then turn to her. And the princess's view? It was a test, a continued forging of her will. She would answer, her voice steady, her analysis sharp and devoid of emotion. She saw the looks on the faces of Cassar and the others, a mixture of resentment, disbelief, and a dawning, fearful respect. She was becoming his creation, a weapon he had sharpened from the ruins of a conquered people. The final test came with the approach to the great city of Kiev, the mother of Russian cities. It was vast, its walls thick, its garrison large and confident. Subutai's scouts reported that the Prince of Kiev had barricaded himself inside, trusting in his fortifications and the onset of winter to save him. In the command gur, surrounded by his grim-faced generals, Subutai laid out his plan. It was a masterpiece of siegecraft, a complex series of feints, bombardments, and the construction of elaborate earthworks to surround the city completely. It was a plan that would take weeks, cost many lives and assaults, but would almost certainly succeed. When he finished, he turned to Liana, who sat slightly behind him, as had become her custom. "Your assessment?" The generals shifted uncomfortably. Their tolerance for this ritual had its limits, especially before a battle of such magnitude. Liana looked at the rough map drawn in the dirt of the Gers floor. She saw the city, the river, the proposed Mongol positions. She saw the logic of Subutai's plan. It was the logic of the anvil and the hammer. But another thought, cold and clear, formed in her mind, a thought that was part Persian court intrigue and part Mongol ruthlessness. "It is a good plan, General," she began, her voice calm. "It will grant us victory. But it will be a costly victory, and it will make a ruin of the city, a ruin that will take years to be of any use to the empire." Subutai's eyes narrowed. "You have an alternative?" "The Prince of Kiev is proud," she said, "but he is also fearful and suspicious of his rivals. He trusts his walls, but he does not trust the other Russian princes to come to his aid. We can use that." She leaned forward, her finger tracing a path on the map. "Do not surround the city completely. Leave a corridor to the west, a path that looks like an oversight, a weakness in our lines. Then let us capture a few of his junior boyars from a skirmish. We treat them well. We feed them, let them see our strength, and then we release them back to the city with a message." "What message?" Cassar grumbled, his arms crossed. Liana's gaze was unwavering. "That General Subutai has no quarrel with the people of Kiev, that his only enemy is their prince, whose arrogance has brought this upon them, that the Mongols have an alliance with Prince Mikhail of Chernigov, who has promised to betray Kiev and attack from the rear once the Mongols assault the gates." The tent was silent. It was a breathtaking lie, a web of deceit spun from whole cloth. "The prince will never believe it," one of the other generals scoffed. "He will," Liana countered, her voice gaining a subtle, persuasive force, "because it is what he fears most. He will look at the corridor we have left open and see it not as a mistake, but as a trap, a route for Mikhail's supposed army to enter. He will be paralyzed. He will waste his energy watching his own back, purging his own court of imagined traitors. His command will fracture. The city's defense will become chaotic. And then," she looked at Subutai, "we do not need to assault the walls. We simply wait. A city that believes it is betrayed from within will tear itself apart. In a week, they will be murdering each other in the streets. In 2 weeks, a faction will open the gates for us, hoping for mercy. We take the city with minimal loss, and we have a functioning city, not a ruin." The silence in the tent was absolute. The generals stared at her, their faces a mixture of astonishment and horror. This was not the straightforward warfare of the steppe. This was something else, a poison-tipped dagger aimed at the mind. It was cunning on a level that shocked them more than any act of brute force. They were warriors. This was the work of a spider. Subutai looked at Liana for a long, long time. There was no approval in his face, no pride. There was only a final, cold assessment. "Do it," he said. The plan unfolded with terrifying precision. The boyars were released. The whisper campaign began. Just as Liana had predicted, paranoia seized Kiev. The prince ordered the arrest of several of his own commanders. A riot broke out between different factions of the garrison. After 11 days, a group of merchants and minor nobles, fearing a wholesale slaughter, seized a gatehouse and opened the northern gate. The Mongols poured in. The conquest was swift, efficient, and remarkably bloodless by their standards. Standing beside Sabbatai on a hill overlooking the surrendered city, Liana watched the horsehair standards of the Mongols rise over the citadel. The deed was done. She had saved thousands of lives, preserved a great city, and secured a swift victory for the Mongols. She had done something truly masterful. She felt nothing but a cold, hollow emptiness. Sabbatai spoke, his voice quiet. "When I found you, you were a symbol of a world we had to break. Now, you have become the key to breaking a world we had not yet conquered. You see now, don't you? True power is not in the sword, but in the will to use every tool, every truth, every lie. You have learned the final lesson." He turned to her. "The warriors were shocked that I did not break your body. They will be more shocked to learn that you have broken the spirit of a great city, without drawing a single blade. They fear you now, not as a witch, but as someone they can never understand. You have transcended being a prize. You have become power itself." Liana looked at her hands, clean and soft, unlike the callous, blood-stained hands of the warriors below. She had achieved what no other captive had. She had earned a place at the right hand of a Mongol general. She had won, and in that moment of supreme victory, Princess Liana, the jewel of Horazm, finally understood the full, horrifying depth of her defeat. She had not been spared the fate of the Georgian prince. She had been given a far worse one. She had been made into the very instrument of the empire that had destroyed her home. The general had not taken her body, nor merely broken her spirit. He had hollowed her out and remade her in his own image. And the result shocked even the most hardened of his own warriors, for they could conquer a city, but only he, with her willing complicity, could conquer a soul.